This is a dated meme. Boomer. The simp wars are over, and everyone lost because they're all losers.
It's time to...
I've decided to cover both modern and classic designs in this tutorial, and as I'll go over shortly, the similarities between the designs show how natural the transition from classic to modern was for Amy. Since my reputation for classic designs precedes me, I'll be covering Junio Amy as best as possible given the limited references we have for her versus the plethora we have for modern Amy. Modern Amy, as with all modern designs, has upped the complexity a bit, though classic Amy was already a more complex design for her era. But it doesn't really matter because as we do with all characters, we're going to start with a simple shape breakdown to understand how the design is thought to work in 3D. Think in elementary shapes, circles, triangles, rectangles. The details come after this basic construction. We can simplify her torso as a trapezoid. Her tutu is a scrunched cylinder, but we can simply represent that as a box from a straight-on view. We can then just apply a sine wave to the design and extrude inward for the details and furls of her dress. Her shirt puffs are rounded triangles we attach at the top of her torso. The most important technique to keep in mind while drawing faces is facial real estate. Use the location of the ears, eyes, nose, and mouth to find proper placements for everything, and pay very close attention to how lines move and flow throughout the character. Moving down to her feet, we can create rectangle boxes in a half circle for her cute high tops with little triangles on either side for the bows. Another important idea I've introduced in earlier episodes is the idea of landmarks on characters. Given the complexity of Amy's design compared to other characters, with Amy having the addition of clothes, it's important to find natural landmarks in the design to help with proportions and establish the character in space. Modern proportions also typically have a smaller head in general, or a larger body, so keep those proportions in mind when drawing. Her torso is a trapezoid about half the size of her head. Her skirt is a half sphere, which we can simply represent as a half circle. Her shoes are a bit trickier as they are more three-dimensional forms than simple 2D shapes. I didn't nail the design correctly in these examples, but the principle of 3D forms stands as an example of how to think of them. Remember to pay attention to facial real estate when setting up the face and its proportions. Modern Amy's headband sits directly on the same spherical axis as her ears and first spike, which makes for an easy first landmark. Taking a step back, you can see the similarities in design. The trapezoid is still the same, the dress is quite similar. In fact, you can even represent classic Amy's dress as a half circle if you'd like, but for three-dimensional purposes, it's better to think of it as a scrunched cylinder as a box. Before drawing along, I highly recommend you do your own character breakdown to better understand the character shapes, and then follow along as best as you can with me. I thought it would be really fun for classic and modern to swap poses, so I decided to use a classic pose for modern Amy and a modern pose for classic Amy. I won't be talking a whole lot during these. Instead, I'd like for you to follow along as best as you can. Pay attention to the way that I'm using shape and 3D forms to construct my drawing before really tying down all the details. Pay attention to those landmarks we talked about, particularly around the spherical axis of her face and her first spike, as well as the facial real estate with her eyes in proportion to her mouth and the rest of her overall head. Practicing perspective will really help you with these basic three-dimensional forms. It's why placing her feet was so simple for me and I can do it so quickly. Moving on to classic Amy, I quickly establish the gesture, pose, and start constructing with basic shapes. Gesture is just a fancy way of saying feeling or movement of the pose you're trying to capture. Even for her bangs, I choose a circle and then add the bang details later. And this time I choose a gestural half circle for her dress, and then draw in a sine wave and extrude inward. An important detail for Junio Amy is her spikes behave identically to Sonic's. So if you're having any trouble drawing Junio Amy, I highly recommend you check out my Junio Sonic tutorial, as it'll cover a lot of the same techniques needed to draw her spikes in her head. Notice how I don't draw the bangs individually. Instead, I clump them together in a larger shape and then simply just fill in the shape with her bangs. I went back and referenced the Junio animations, and when Amy appears briefly, I decided to go back and get a bit more accurate tie down of some of her designs, particularly around her eyes. And that's going to conclude the tutorial. I'll leave the images up for a little bit before ending the video so you can compare your own work to mine. As for future videos, Amy concludes the classic cast. I may include one additional character later down the road. But as for now, that concludes the whole How to Draw series. I'll be starting a new series come 2021. I'll be covering how to do airbrushed artwork, finally, and a lot of my videos going forward in 2021 will be more focused on general painting and drawing rather than Sonic designs, but I'll cover that in a more personal video coming soon. I hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving. I will see you in the next video.